thank you, Alexis, for the introduction. I'm going to immediately share my screen with my presentation, which is now, I hope you can see it. So, yes, I entitled this presentation, The Path to Trustworthy AI, Principles, Requirements, Standards, and Governance. And there is a subtitle, which is From Principles to Practice. Because when we speak about those topics, indeed, the number of principles, declarations, etc., is very high. I think on the last count, it was something like 173. The reaction of many people is that, well, those principles and those declarations are fine, but how concretely can we achieve this? So practice. The introductory talks earlier actually have very well set the stage, and I'm sorry because I'm going to repeat some of their content, which I need for my for introducing my own talk. So bear with me, and maybe I will also give some detailed remarks about the issues of explainability specifically that have been raised. As it has been presented earlier, AI based on machine learning, which is our main concern. I mean, we are not so much speaking about other methods. This is based on statistical correlations of data to make predictions, as you have heard earlier. Now, concretely, what does this mean? It means that the system is basically a statistical processing system. Data, what is called data science, is mainly statistical methods to process data. Now, there are very common things in statistics, which is that the computations are going to use probability distributions to detect some regularities. They are going to correlate data elements together, and really it is about correlation. And we have really, and I'm insisting very much, keep in mind that the whole thing is about correlation. It's not about causation. Causation is something else. It's more related to interpretation of the statistical results, which machine learning systems don't do. The specific feature also about these techniques is that they are going to use artificial neural networks as classifier to extract and associate features, which means data is going to be processed so that common features in this data that are not necessarily self-evident in the first glimpse. I mean, maybe we don't see them, but they are there regularly in the data. And this is what neural nets are going to do. They are going to extract, associate features in the data. And by doing this, they are going to provide a classification of the data. And as it has been said very clearly, the whole process is under the control of optimization algorithms, for example, minimizing a loss function, or and there are several methods to do this, such as graded descent, for example, and other methods. So the objective of these parameters are to compute algorithms is to compute the parameters of the system, specifically, for example, the synaptic weights, so that to increase the accuracy of the system, which is the loss function, expressed by the loss function. By doing so, these systems are, of course, in a way or another, are going to be biased. I mean, bias is a concept that is inherent to statistical data processing. Any statistician knows that there are bias issues when you do statistical computations, because by essence, you choose some, it has been very well explained, but I want to insist, you do some average, and this average, according to the way you have defined it, you will find some bias in a way or another. There is no perfect method. And the way you address this bias, the way you correct this bias is really important, and professional statisticians have methods to do this. Now, in machine learning specifically, we can say that we have three main sources of bias. The data itself, which is systematically decomposed into a training set and test set, might be, and I could say even is systematically biased, because one important point is how much does it actually represent the population that you are studying. And by population, I don't mean human population necessarily. You might be making statistics about oranges or apples or cars, whatever. What you need is that your data actually, your sample, because the data is just a sample of reality, does represent reality. If you are doing some processing about, for example, cars, and you want to know what are the most car colors, for example, well, you need to take data on car colors which represent correctly the situation in the real world. If you consider only cars, for example, that are, say, used by administration, you will end up saying that the majority of cars are black, which is not necessarily true in the general population. So all this, of course, is important, and the issue is not necessarily so simple actually to address. Another source of bias in machine learning is the fact that this data is not just sitting there, it has been curated, it has been labeled, because the whole learning process, the training process, so that, for example, to distinguish cats from dogs, etc., is going to use the information that such or such or such data, such or such or such image has dogs in it or cats in it. So someone has put those labels. Someone has defined those captions. And very, very often, this process is done by sourcing, crowdsourcing, using, for example, platforms such as Amazon Turk, which means that people are going to be paid maybe 1 or 2 cents to click on something as fast as possible, so because they want to of course, be paid more, about saying, well, is there a person or a cat or a dog or whatever on this image? And this process itself is going to induce some bias, depending on the quality of work of these of the captioning and of the labels, and the diversity of interpretation of those persons. So this is a human process, which means data is going to include some human bias as well, not necessarily bias that is conscious. It's just the interpretation of what they see on the image. The second source of bias, people mostly think that bias comes from data. That's correct, but it's not sufficient. It comes also from the system design itself. You have a neural net, so you have choices, design choices of this neural net. How many layers I'm going to put? How many neurons per layer? What are the connectivity of these neurons? All these are going to influence the result. And the tuning of the hyperparameters, the choice of the hyperparameters are going to influence the result. So it's not necessarily, again, a conscious bias by the designer, but if they change the design, the result might be different and will probably be tilting to a direction or another. So design choices have to be also examined in as much as they influence the result of the system. The choice of features, we said that the process is to extract features and to then correlate them, etc. But who decides what those features are? Well, the designer. It's not by chance that, for example, a system is going to decompose, say, an image into verticals or horizontal alignments of pixels. This is because it has been programmed in the system to extract those parameters. If, for example, I have a system that doesn't extract color in images at all, it will be blind to colors. And of course, it doesn't make sense, for example, to use the system to know what are the colors of the cars. And this is from the designer work, which might ignore or, on the other hand, favor some of the features. On the other hand, there are semantics associated to the classes. When I say cat or dog, I'm putting semantic labels on something which is just purely the result of some computation. Let's not forget that computations don't have semantics. They have only syntax. They have just computational result. The system does not know actually what is a cat or a dog. This comes from the label and the captioning, and it comes also from the semantics that have been defined by the designer of the system. And these semantics have some importance because the way the input goes in one direction or the other in the classification will depend on what I defined behind this classification. And this might lead to a lot of confusions, right? So, for example, if I define that everything that has to fall into different classes related on color, I might have in the same class things that don't have anything to do with each other except that they have the same color, and then I can interpret them as being identical, but it's not so trivial that the underlying criterion was the color. And finally, the choice of the optimization algorithm and convergence criteria, of course, it has been mentioned, I'm not going to insist, is going to induce some bias. So we must have all this in mind when speaking about bias, not just the data. So speaking about fairness and bias mitigation, this is where this, maybe you can mute your microphone if you're not speaking, because I'm hearing some noise. Speaking about fairness and bias mitigation, we have to introduce also this notion of trust. Trust in the AI system, which means that the human user is going to give some credit to the system result. This trust is dependent on the way we perceive that they are fair. It's very much a common reaction that you are going to trust something that appears to be indeed fair, that treats correctly, fairly, different situations. If it doesn't, you become suspicious about its quality. It's not the only criterion, but I think fairness is really important to trust the decision maker. A decision maker who is not fair, even a human one, will not be trusted. immediately it will be considered as being biased, and therefore you don't trust anything it does. But fairness is context dependent. In my opinion, there is not a general definition that can be applied to anything. It depends on the application scenarios. It depends on the specific case. What does it mean to be fair given such or such problem? Might be different from problem to another. And there is some confusion also between fairness and equality, as we can discuss about this. Now, but there are different issues. There are technical issues, of course. This is what I mentioned earlier, data quality, statistical representativeness, system design. These can be treated in terms of the system itself, the technical system, the development of the technical system. But that's not enough, because this happens in a context. This happens in a company. This happens in an institution who is going to deploy the system. This happens in society where you have laws, you have rules, and you have constraints on the use of the system and social consequences. So it's not just a technical issue, it's a social technical issues. And therefore, governance framework, governance structures are important. Frameworks that define oversight on the specific use cases, consultation of stakeholders, multi-stakeholders for design and deployment, for example, can mitigate risk, can contribute to mitigate risk. And finally, an important point, and this was raised a few minutes ago, the transparency of the system is important for actually raising the level of trust, and explainability, and I'm going to use explicability and explainability in the same way, interchangeably. Actually, I think explainability is not a correct word in English, but it has been used technically speaking, and it's very much used. So, but for me, it's really synonymous to explicability from a technical point of view. I'm not speaking about from a low point of view. So transparency and explainability are also important to increase trust. You want to know why or how the system arrived to a given conclusion, and if this if the answer appears correct to you or convincing to you, then you will start to trust the system. And if you understand the operation of the system more or less, you are also going to trust it more. So let me just give you a couple of transparencies about this issue. Now, this the transparency and the next ones is extracted from a publication. You see it on the bottom of the screen that I contributed to write, and it's open access. You can get it published on Archive late 2019 and in Information Fusion journal in early 2020. That tries to make sense about the issue of explainability. This is a survey, a review paper, and we have reviewed actually about 400 papers to understand what are we talking about, to try to clarify those concepts and provide some definition or contribute to provide some definitions. Now the problem, I'm going to immediately give you the problem. There is no common understanding of what explainability is. It's still an open research topic. It's not stable. So you can find different definitions. You can find different features. You can find different words. We have to stabilize. I mean, it's a problem of the community to try to stabilize a common understanding and define correctly the methods, etc. It's just important to know it's work in progress. So you have many similar words in common language: understandability, comprehensibility, interpretability, explainability, transparency. We try to make sense of it, but what we have perceived generally, again, this is a result from the survey that we have accomplished, the reviews, So it appears that explainability is a notion that is associated to the fact that there is an interface between the human and the decision maker, the AI system, that is at the same time an accurate proxy of the decision maker, which means represent correctly what happened in the system. And also it's comprehensible to a human. A human can understand what happened. And it's related to transparency. So for example, we have defined levels of transparency, which are related to the notion of simulatability, which is the ability to simulate the model, simulate what happened in the model by humans. Decomposability doesn't mean in your mind, of course. Decomposability, it's to explain each part of the model, the input, the parameters, the calculation. It's not just the full black box. It's something that you can decompose. And algorithmic transparency, which means that you can analyze what happened in the model, in the process. So you can analyze mathematically if it's what the computations have been achieved, is it correct, etc. This provides these three parameters: simultaneity, decomposability, and algorithmic transparency, provide means for explainability. You can say that the system is more or less explainable depending on how much it is in conformity of these criteria. Now, non-transparent methods, which means difficult to explain, or for which explanations are really problematic and research is needed, are those systems that are common in machine learning. And specifically multilayer neural networks, convolutional and recurrent neural networks. And so this is why you have a lot of work and publications for different methods, approaches, post hoc, ex ante, or using symbolic knowledge to come and plug on the non-transparent model, non-explainable model to provide some explanation, which might reduce accuracy. So you have, of course, a decision to make, because there is a trade-off here. But all these are non-transparent methods by design, by nature. Okay, so we have to keep this in mind. Now, I'm going to continuing my presentation about this path from principles to practice. After introducing some of the concept and some of the issues related specifically to bias, because this is our topic, but not only. I was saying that trust really is important, and this is what the high-level expert group has identified. I was a member of this group, and the discussion led us to say that demonstrable, not just trustworthiness like that, but you have to demonstrate it. You have to understand that it is real. Trustworthiness is a prerequisite to develop, deploy, and use AI. It's important to understand that this is both from the point of view of the user and from the point of view, in my opinion, of the designer. Because if the designer doesn't develop a trustworthy system, the users won't use it. And therefore, this designer would have put on the market something that won't be successful. Now, there are some paradoxical situations. Of course, I'm quite aware, for example, that recommender systems are completely opaque and not trustworthy, but people use them. So this is not what I said is not something to take very, very strictly, because there are some other reasons why people behave in a irrational way when using some systems. But we can get back to that. So what the system said, what the group said is that those socio-technical systems must be lawful, conform to law, existing law, must be ethical because not everything is in the law, and yet, at least, and must be robust, technically robust, meaning that they should be operating correctly. And of course, this leads us to technical solutions for one part, but to when I speak about ethics, that's another issue. Also, something is important because many people have criticized the expression trustworthy AI. Now, we have to understand that this is a short title. It's not AI itself which is trustworthy. It's the organization developing and deploying AI in which we can have trust, and therefore we trust that the product is going to work appropriately. The trust is always not towards the technical system, it's towards the organization, toward the legal framework that enabled this deployment. And I'm going to get back to that. It's really important to understand this. It's not the system which is trusted directly as such. And of course, something we shouldn't forget, but I'm not going to insist on it, is that there is also some responsibility of the user so that they use the system in an appropriate fashion according to the constraints of use that have been explained, have been defined by the designer. You don't put your hand in a toaster, you put the bread, right? So a toaster isn't meant to heat your hand. You shouldn't use it this way. And this is obvious, but for AI systems, it's not so obvious sometimes. Now, the principles on which the high-level expert group has discussed and agreed upon are those 4 principles. Now, those 4 principles have been actually published before by a group of people within a think tank called AI for People. So it was led by Luciano Floridi, and I was a member of this group, where we discussed about the principles that have to guide the design of trustworthy AI. I mean, the word wasn't really yet coined, trustworthy AI. But we had another principle, which was principle of beneficence. You don't see principle of beneficence here. Principle of beneficence, principle of non-maleficence, principle of justice, and principle of autonomy are the 4 classical principles of bioethics. And of course, this was an inspiration to apply it to AI. But in the high-level expert group, the principle of beneficence wasn't actually finally retained. And one of the reasons, that can be very much discussed, is that it was difficult to define that a given AI system is beneficent on its own. It's not like in bioethics where you, for example, provide a medication or you do some medical act, and this is for the benefit of the patient. Here, it's not necessarily. I mean, the notion of benefit is not so simple to define. So finally, because of this complexity of defining what is beneficial exactly when you use a technical system, it was put aside. But we have those principles of autonomy, human agency, human control. We have this principle of non-maleficence. We have the principle of justice, which is related to fairness. And we have this additional principle, which is explicability, related to transparency, traceability, auditability. Of the arguments that I have presented earlier, this principle appeared to be really important in the Floridi et al. Paper and adopted also by a high-level expert group. Now, this principle level was the second phase. The first phase was this one, lawful, ethical, robust. Second phase is principles, ethical principles. Ethical principles are ethical imperatives. You have to abide with them, right? How can we make them more operational, more concrete? And that's the third level. It's this notion of requirement. When you are an engineer designing a system, you are designing the system for a given purpose, for a given client, if you wish. And the first thing is that someone has defined to you the requirements, what this system should be designed to do, and with which constraints. Something which is called requirement in the system design is something that is mandatory. You have to do it. It's not an option. So this is why the word requirement is really important. This means that if you design a system that is trustworthy, it must abide, it must comply with these 7 requirements. And these requirements are actually deduced from the principles, making things a little bit actionable. I will not detail, but you see that you recognize human autonomy in the first one, human agency and oversight. Technical robustness and safety is related to non-maleficence. It must be safe, it must be resilient to attack, to security, etc. Privacy and data governance is related also to this principle of doing no harm, because you have to respect for privacy of people, value to have some data governance in place. Transparency is related to the principle of explicability. Diversity, non-discrimination is related to fairness and to justice. Social and environmental well-being, it could be interpreted also with the principle of non-maleficence. The system shouldn't be negative, has negative effect on people, on democracy, on society, but also on the environment. And that's more and more important in the climate change, climate action context, as you know. And finally, accountability, which is also related to the principle of autonomy, which means humans are responsible, accountability of humans, of course, but also of to do no harm. So people are accountable if something goes wrong. And it has been mentioned, there is also this assessment list for trustworthy AI, which I will not present, but which goes on to make things a little bit more specific. And a tool has been developed, a software tool that is open. You can access it. You can find it on the web. It's called Altai. Altai has different meanings. So if you look for Altai only, you will find too many things. But if you put some more keywords, you will zoom in on this, and you can then go to this website. So this website is a kind of a self-assessment. You don't have to disclose anything about your system, just answer some questions, and it gives you some answers about how much your system complies or not, and some advice. Okay, now we said that there are some technical aspects and non-technical aspects. Here is a set of technical aspects that actually relate to how to achieve trustworthy AI, the architecture of the system. system which is privacy by respects privacy or security by design. So all this is technical explanation methods undergoing test and validation. And mind you, test and validation is something really important and very much not respected in those systems. In software engineering, you go on with testing, verification, validation for some time because it's so important before releasing a system on the market, specifically if it has some critical consequences. For example, if you have a system that is used on airliners, planes, for example, autopilot, you have to test it, validate it, and undergo a lot of such test and validation before releasing it. If you have a system which controls, for example, power grids, same thing. Now, and you need also quality of service indicators so that you can follow, because the system isn't going to be processing always the same data. Data is variable, so you have to also measure its quality of services. All these is technical, but there is non-technical aspects, and this is important for us in this context. And the non-technical aspects is define the environment in which the system is going to be operating, or really the design. Regulation, I'll get back to regulation. Codes of conducts of the engineers. We don't have such codes of conducts which are very well defined, for example, for other domains such as civil engineering. Standards. Standards are both technical and non-technical aspects. They are tools, I will say one word about it, to build systems that comply with what the standard is about and to test it much more easily. For the purpose of what? Of certification. Certification is all about this. Accountability of the designers or deployers, which need governance frameworks, but also education, awareness to foster an ethical mindset of the designers and the deployers. Stakeholder participation, all this is something that is about the organization of the system, including, of course, diversity and inclusiveness. Now, that ended the work of the high-level expert group, and then the commission took some time and to reflect on this and came up with the legislative proposal, which was published last April. And before that, there was the white paper. Now, the commission has adopted something which is a risk-based approach, which is quite understandable. It can be debatable, of course, because the commission doesn't want to over-regulate, but they don't want to miss the point. So a compromise between a kind of soft law and a hard law is to use the criterion of risk to put the line between what is acceptable, what is what falls under the law, and what doesn't fall under the law. So if the risk is minimal, the green part, this will be permitted without any restriction. It's not subject to any regulation. If you go up in the pyramid and if you have something which is considered as being low risk, well, this is permitted, but you need to abide with transparency obligations. So, and one example, for example, is chatbots, where you need to be transparent on the fact that users are interacting with a machine and not with humans. Is this enough? Can be debatable. I can interact with a machine. I know I'm interacting with the machine. Nevertheless, there might be some issues about this interaction. But what attracted more attention is the high risk systems. the higher risk system are permitted subject to compliance with some conformity assessment, and this is ex ante. So I will detail this a little bit more in a minute, but there is also unacceptable risk, which means prohibited. And this is, of course, related to an application, which is, for example, here, social scoring. We don't want this in our democratic countries. So no, don't use it. It doesn't mean you cannot use the same algorithm to do something else. Now, it's important to really understand that the legislative instrument here has defined the this risk notion based on the intended purpose of the system and in line with existing product safety legislation, because again, if there are already a context, a framework in which the system is already should already be compliant with, well, we don't need to define new laws. So again, it depends on the if it's a safety component. AI systems intended to be used as safety components of products that are already subject to third-party ex-ante conformity assessment, such as medical devices. This is one category, and another category is standalone systems, which will address other kinds of values, such as fundamental rights, etc. And there, the Commission went on to define a list. So the one thing which is interesting with the Commission approach is that they see a text which is applicable, but on what is it applicable? This is an annex, and the annex can be updated, modified according to evolution of technology, to different criteria, use, its acceptability, etc. But the basic text could be something of a law. So safety components and standalone system, and you have a complete list, that which means if you are in this list, you are considered high risk. If you are not in this list, you are not considered high risk. And again, it's about the intended use. This is a standalone system. So you see, it goes from biometric identification to administration of justice and democratic processes, whatever this means in detail, etc. Again, I will not spend time on this. What is important is that this boils down to a European certification, CE marking. The process actually is that you need your system to be marked CE. And the process is, well, first, is it high risk or not? If it's not, you can move on. If it is, then you have to comply with the regulation. And the regulation is, in a way, quite inspired by the 7 key requirements of the high-level expert group to some point. And then there is some documentation, and then there is a procedure to say that, well, this is in conformity. What happens in 3 here is something that is done by some third-party organization that is going to verify that, yes, you are compliant, conformity assessment. And then the CE marking can be put on the system, and you sign something and you put it on the market. And in the mind of the Commission, most systems will not be high risk, so it's only transparency, okay? And voluntary code of conducts, no big problem. I'm not going to stay more here. Now, just let me say one word about standards here. For me, standards are a means to build compliance. I mean, if I have a standard and I say, I did implement this standard, say, for example, ISO 9000, it means I'm going to follow some process. And the fact that this standard has been defined by someone and I'm just applying it guarantees in a way to the user that I am abiding by the constraints that are related to this standard. So a standard is a tool that a designer, an industry can use. They don't have to invent it. As long as they use it, they can be certified that, of course, if it's proven that they are using it, they can be certified as being in conformity. So it's important to see that here we are speaking about standards which are not purely technical. And IEEE has come up with, since the start of the Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous Systems and Intelligent Systems, with 15 standard proposals. And I want just to point the first two because they are published already. Not all the others are published. I mean, very few of them have finished yet, but these two are important. The 701, Transparency of Autonomous Systems, and 70000 is a model process. It's a process for designing systems that are addressing ethical, the process is addressing ethical concern. And this is very important. Why? Actually, it has to do with ethically aligned design or value-based design. This is what this is more or less about, is really to identify the values, the stakeholders and the values of the stakeholders that are impacted by the system, analyzing those values, analyzing the tensions between values, setting value priorities, designing then the architecture, the technical architecture of the system, the alternatives, and defining success metric for validation, and then deployment and evaluation. This follow value-based design approaches, which are well known, and is actually a process specifically designed here for AI systems. Now, my last slide, I've been a little bit long, but I was told that I have no limit on time. So what we are speaking about is not trustworthy AI, is trustworthy development, use, and governance of AI. And one thing I would like to say is that AI is not a silver bullet. I mean, it's trendy to use AI, but it's not necessarily the most adequate approach to many problems. So first thing one has to ask is really using AI system, statistical system, etc., the best way to answer to this project at hand. Second point is technical robustness, transparency, and explainability, which are both technical, but also the transparency and explainability need some framework to be developed. Auditing and certification, and this is related to standards. And finally, of course, we need a regulatory framework, and the example I've taken about the European framework is important because it tries to manage the problem of over-regulation or under-regulation, if I may say so, hard regulation and soft regulation by, in a way, as we say in French, managing la chèvre, le chou, which are two contradictory things. Trying to be abiding with the trustworthiness at the same time, not over-regulating. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Raja, for this presentation.
Bonjour. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui. Antoine, should I leave the chair to you?
Thank you very much.
Happy to do that.
Sorry. Sorry, I managed eventually to come back. Thank you very much for this very interesting intervention. And in fact, it's at the core of our subject, because our subject is legal governance of algorithms, hard law or soft law. And indeed, there is the problem of what legal instruments should bear all these obligations. And as you know, between hard law and soft law, we speak now in law, in theory of law, of a scale of normativity. And it can be fit to the variations of definitions of scope, of objectives linked to artificial intelligence. And this is a very important thing, because we have problem of definitions, so it's better perhaps to have soft law. For instance, there is a problem of definition with implication, with legal implication, because soft law is law, between trustworthiness and fairness. And there is perhaps a tendency also to deem fairness as a kind of high quality, covering everything, you know, a box of notions. And there is a problem. There is a problem of which two kinds of soft law: private soft law, public soft law, and the links between the two. So we'll have to, of course, the problems of guidelines then, because, for instance, guidelines are not quite complain or explains in public law. Guidelines are, you should follow the guidelines, but you have to not to complain to the guidelines in public interest for some particular cases. So this is all the things we'll have to indeed make concrete in law. And it's very interesting to see that we have this kind of, for instance, the European law, as you have magnificently described it. In France, we have the State Council and the independent authority, la Commission nationale informatique et liberté. It's very interesting because they want to find substantive principle and two substantive principle, which would be the trustworthiness, which is indeed fairness. There is a kind of ambiguity, and the principle of vigilance. So I don't want to be too long, and so I give the floor to Karine Gentelet about human rights, because they are the hard foundation of all these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk today. I have a very unstable Wi-Fi connection, so I'm going to share my screen, but in order for you to be able to listen to me, I will shut down my camera. So okay, can you hear me? Yeah, so let's go.
Yes.
Okay, before speaking about human rights, I want to introduce myself. Let me move my, okay. I am a researcher in social science, and I have mostly worked in collaboration with indigenous people on access to justice, but not access to court, just to be precise. How groups that are socially or historically invisible use technology to tackle their needs. I also work on research ethics and social responsibility. In September 2020, I was granted the Abeona-ENS-OBVIA chair to explore the intersection between social justice and AI. The previous holder of this chair was Dr. Kate Crawford. What I am presenting to you today is the work I've been doing since then with my team, and especially PhD candidate in law from Ottawa University, Sarit Mizrahi. This is a multidisciplinary conference. Let me define where I stand as a researcher. My research is based on a bottom-up approach. This means that the solutions I'm working on are designed by and for the people primarily impacted. So I do some field research. I focus on marginalization and invisibilization processes because I think this is what will help understand the conditions of inclusion. What I am interested in is social and digital agency. That's why I use the notion of marginalized group and community instead of vulnerable groups and community, because it is a much more accurate characterization of the situation. People are most of the time put in a position of vulnerability because of a lack of consent, representation, or participation, and because of asymmetrical power dynamics, not because they are vulnerable to begin with. Okay, at the intersection of social justice, human rights, and AI, there are 4 levels of issue we need to focus on: data sets, biases, deployment, and governance. There are issues with data sets on which algorithms are trained. In some contexts, marginalized groups are overrepresented, but in others, they are underrepresented. And each of these come with their own particular consequences, like with predicting policing. There are also issues on classification and labeling of data and information. Biases, which are an important technical component of the functioning of AI systems, are mainly thought of in terms of technological problem, but that is far from an accurate assessment. The biases propagated by AI are mainly reflection of those that have always existed in society, but to a much higher scale. I am thinking, for instance, of the identification of people with dark skin as gorilla. Biases are rooted in discrimination practices and data, but not yet been fully identified and decoded as such. There are more and more studies that help us understand the impact of AIs on marginalized groups, but little is still known and documented. There is also probably a lot more we must understand and document as AI systems will continue to be deployed. There are increasingly also more calls for accountability, respect of basic human rights, and the importance of addressing the particular needs of populations that are the most impacted. Call from groups for which AI tools do not meet their need and whose right has been violated. What social science literature shows is that the impacts of AI systems are greater because of social and economic marginalization. So discrimination and exclusion are reinforced by technology and its use. And it leads to a double structural discrimination that occurs on 2 separate but concurrent levels and therefore amplify its negative consequences. This then raises issue of social acceptability, social responsibility, and ethics, of course, but also of accountability and governance. When we talk about AI human rights, there are 3 approaches in the regulation, and my colleague Raja told about that. The first one is ethic of AI. Ethical frameworks are non-binding and offer no concrete protection for human rights. And I'm going very fast on that because this is not the purpose, but we can go back during the discussion. The second approach is a risk-based approach. It subjects AI system to a range of obligations which are aligned with their level of risk. The risk-based approach does not always protect human rights in an absolute way. It is designed to find a balance between competing interests, effectively permitting human rights violation under circumstances where the operational risks are low. But just because the risks are minimal doesn't mean they are non-existent. At its core, the approach is rooted in inequality and in an attitude that conceives of our fundamental freedom as negotiable. Moreover, the balance favored in this approach doesn't reflect citizen participation. It is based on a top-down approach that makes assumptions about how citizens experience the risk of AI rather than concretely addressing their needs. Most importantly, this risk-based approach is very often difficult for citizens to mobilize. It's an approach that often relies on government actors, on AI developers themselves for enforcement, and therefore do not provide citizens with the tools that they will empower them to advocate for their own rights. The third approach, the rights-based approach, is seen as protecting human rights in a more concrete way, but still face societal issues. Protection tools are sectioned into themes and rights. Also, there is a conception of enjoyment of human rights as if human rights were a privilege. The primary difficulty with the right-based approach is that it gives right to citizens, but doesn't really provide them with easily mobilizable ways to enforce those rights. It's mostly, just imposes obligation on AI developer to respect those rights, but using methods that have proven quite ineffective in actually providing concrete protection to users' rights. And there might be some issue as the risk are not yet well documented. And even if we are talking about a right-based approach, risks are still indirectly being considered. The problem with concentrating so much on risk as opposed to impact is problematic because one, it is not a long-term technology solution, risk change with every advancement in technology. And second, merely addressing risk isn't enough to protect people from the negative experiences they suffer at the end of this technology. And the reason is because risk exist across multiple sectors and levels. It is therefore difficult to define them and address them in a singular way, and even more difficult to define them in a way that adequately accounts for the ancillary repercussion that human rights abuse have on the physical integrity of people, their mental health, or even their safety. In order to be able to address all cultural, societal, political, and economic facets of AI impacts on human rights, we need solutions that are designed for everyday people, solutions that are easily mobilizable for citizens or for civil society organizations. Instead, what we have now are regulatory frameworks that are very broad, high level, and technology based, which make it very difficult for everyday citizens to mobilize and quite simply don't provide them with tools to be able to advocate for their own rights. Back to the title of my presentation now. How can human rights be a pillar of AI regulation? First and foremost, it's crucial to adopt a comprehensive vision of human rights. Human rights are not just the fundamental freedom outlined in charters. They are social values inherent to both human dignity and agency, and ensuring their protection relies on determining solutions that promote these two objectives. And that's what my work seeks to achieve. And it does by advancing practices that support the participation and inclusion of citizens in the governance of AI system, allowing these people to articulate how their dignity and agency could be upheld in digital environments in ways that concretely respond to their particular need. This is, as I see it, the very first step in promoting a regulatory, my God, this word is very complicated one to say for a Francophone, regulatory ecosystem built around the notion of human rights. So this is not human right as a sum of rights, but as an ecosystem of value commonly shared in societies that could give citizens, impacted and marginalized citizens, the leverage to describe, qualify their experiences and address the abuse they are faces. I'm not talking about droit de l'homme or droit de la personne. These are two Francophone notions that have in common to use the word human in singular form. This is not also an issue of translation from French to English or even an issue of common law or civil law. It is instead an issue on how violation of human rights can be thought of only in terms on how they affect a singular person, but rather of how they affect societal group as well. This is why it is important to frame it in plural form. Let me change my slide. Okay. For me, as a sociologist of law, it is a matter of understanding and reflecting the complexity of human identity, its deepness and its interaction with various societal dimensions, especially if we want to consider and include what is extracted from this human person, such as data that are not protected by individual droit de la personne, but when taken together have an impact on their dignity and agency. The people I've talked to don't necessarily care about technology. They care about its impact on the impact it has on them, their family, and their lives. They don't necessarily talk about legal rights or understand precisely what the right to privacy implies, for example. That said, they talk about dignity, respect, and justice, working with societal instruments and structure that already exist outside the AI world or context that are already known and have been mobilized could be one of the solutions to addressing injustice following the deployment of AI system. I'm talking about charters of fundamental rights, charter of social rights. I'm talking about elected representative and democratic governance bodies. Society, we have built an ecosystem of governance body instrument that works and people know how to use it in their everyday lives. As society, we know how to use and strengthen our social fabric, how to manage power issue. It's not perfect, but it works. It is designed around citizen participation, democracy and representation, as well as civil society involvement. They are designed around human and societal issues and context. They are also designed to support accountability and transparency. So I leave you with that question. Why then develop regulation instrument which cannot use this structure? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before Thierry will be our discutant. It's very, your very interesting intervention show that talking about how we concretely translate in law these requirements. We may see the importance of the differences between hard law and soft law, because I'm talking that let's be neutral about the content. I don't say that it's not important, but I mean, what could be the trustworthy instrument, legal instrument of the concretization of the changes implied by artificial intelligence and algorithms in, for instance, the fundamental rights of human beings, human rights. And it's very interesting to see that you have two levels. First, you take the well-known classical and very important hard norms about fundamental rights, but you have the question of raising new norms, new quasi-norms, new ways of protecting in concreto these rights. And I think that's there is when we'll have to write down all these things. It will be very interesting, both in the content, but also for the form of the instrument, legal instrument. And you stressed rightly about groups of persons, the problem of legitimacy. This private and public soft law. Public soft law, it's perhaps easier because you have public institutions, and you may say that, but even in public institutions, you have the problem of groups of experts, for the guidelines, which has been described in the precedent intervention, but also private groups. Which legitimacy? How can we make that the single citizens and groups of citizens, according to what make their humanity, what is important for them, could be translated in soft law, especially in soft law. And as you know, we've got the notion of soft ethics in artificial intelligence. So it's very, very interesting, and thank you. And perhaps I'll give the floor to Thierry, and then we'll have a discussion with you and the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Karine and Raja, for your very rich and stimulating presentations. Obviously, your presentations are very different in the sense that they reveal your respective background, social science and sociology of law for Karine, and robotics and the world of science and techniques for Raja. I think it's a source of richness to have such diversity. So as a discutant, I'll make some comments and based on your presentations, and I'll try to give a broader view in line with subject of the session, and to maybe to stimulate the discussion with the audience. So I start with Raja. As usual, Raja, your presentation is so rich. So I have 2 or 3 points I'd like to focus on. The first question I'd like to ask you, in your perception, do you think that the current IA Act in the European Union implements the ethical principles you have focused on earlier in your presentation? So that's the first question. The second has to do with your argument in favor of standardization. I think it's a very interesting and stimulating idea, considering that, in your opinion, standards are tools which are appropriate to build compliance and to promote ethics through certification, standardization, and so on. And you refer to the EAA standards. What's your opinion about the implementability of these standards in Europe? That's the second question. Third question, it's about the once again the ongoing IA Act in the European Union. So the classification of risk is justified by the preoccupation of the Commission, of the European Commission, to not over-regulate. But it seems to me that 2 issues can be raised. The first has to do with fundamental rights. Can we consider that the fundamental rights are guaranteed by the prohibition of the higher risk level? I mean, social scoring and so on. Access to justice, etc., is at the level just below the sub-level. What's your opinion about the coherence between fundamental rights in the sense of the European Convention of Human Rights and the classification of risk promoted by the current IA Act? And the other second dimension, which has a direct connection with the theme of the session, for the second level of risks, the Commission states that the code of conduits are more appropriate than strict regulation. And so we have a legislative act at the European level, which gives force to some soft law commitments. So I now move on Karine Gentelet's presentation. I think that the points you raise are fundamental, because when we consider the things from below, from the people, and for the most marginalized people, I think it's a good test to assess the fairness and and the trustiness of algorithmic decision-making process and so on. And taking into account the particular need of people, it seems to me absolutely a necessity. You have said, and I completely agree with you, that ethics principles are not non-binding, so I'll come back on this issue on broader perspectives. And what I would like to ask you, Karine, is your notion of human rights. You define them as a system of social values, as an ecosystem of values. So it's very, very interesting, of course. But what's your opinion about the eventual recognition of the human rights in this direction to influence the technical change or in a way more compatible with the aspect of human dignity and needs of people. So that's three specific questions, and I'd like to try to enlarge the perspectives around the relation between hard law or soft law. The first observation, it seems to me that the huge diversity of forms of what we used to call soft law. Diversity in terms of content and diversity in terms of actors and institutions involved. The diversity in terms of content is quite obvious, because some code of conducts and ethical principles focus on deontology of professionals, of information, for example, of engineers. Other simply state broad principles. Other go into deeper details about what is responsibility of accountability of algorithms, and so on. And diversity of terms of factors. They are soft law produced by professional associations, by individual firms, by collective entities like a partnership on AI, an event. So Raja is part of the process with an expert group connected with public institutions, and namely the European Commission for the high-level group, expert group on AI. So there's huge diversity. So it seems to me that the soft law to often take this category as a black box, and maybe it's time to open this black box and to test the enforceability of these different components of what we call soft law. So that's a second observation. Most of the soft law commitment, like code of conduct, of principles, of a responsible or accountable or trustee IA, are not binding per se. So my question is whether legislation of courts can transform this voluntary mechanism into binding sense. I stop now. I had some point, but I skip it to not be too long. Once again, thank you, Karine. Thank you, Raja, for your very, very stimulating presentation.
So, do you want us to give some answers? I mean, answers to react to your points Thierry, you are
to
muted.
react, Raja, instead of...
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, these are really very, very important issues that you have raised. Does the AI Act reflect the Trustworthy AI guidelines? Well, of course, I'm speaking from my personal point of view. I think it reflects it partially, and I would say probably not from if you position yourself on a principal point of view. I think it's a compromise. The AI Act is a compromise. Let's not forget that the whole issue is an economical issue first, and that what interests governments, and the reason we have so many AI plans all over the world, is the economical impact of developing those systems and using those systems. So mostly governments don't want to prevent their industries from developing AI systems and selling AI systems. This is why it's an economical, it has been an issue. It has been identified as being really an important point in developing in economical development in general, I would say. And this is why you have also the OECD, who is very much interested in this, and the G7, et cetera, et cetera. So let's not forget, and when you have such interests, considerable interests in the playground, things become a little bit complex and difficult. So all the solutions or the approaches are, in my opinion, a compromise, and this compromise might be satisfactory or not, depending on where you put the requirement. I mean, what you are happy with or not. So personally, again, to answer your question, I think the AI Act is a little bit below what one would have expected, because it's really putting too much importance on this risk notion, which is not well defined, by the way. In my opinion, it's an improvement with respect to the white paper that was published in 2019, but it raises a lot of questions about this notion of risk to what, risk to whom. The instrument wants to be agile. This is why the domains and the applications are in an annex, but still, and I want just to give one concrete example. Take social media. With respect to this notion of risk, if you want to start a social media network today, I mean, it wouldn't be considered as a risk. Okay, it's connecting people, basically. What's the risk? And we have seen, of course, that according to the business model of those systems, because it's not the social media, it's the business model, which is based on increasing the time on people spend on the social media so that they can read advertisement, and this is why the system is free. And this advertisement, of course, can be manipulated, and they become not just advertisement for maybe buying some brand of coffee, say, but for political opinions. And this is where the problem comes in. How do you define risk here? It's a very vague situation to define risk. This is why, in my opinion, this risk-based approach is easy for some domains, for example, medical devices, transportation systems, but it's not so easy for something which is much more complex. And therefore, it's not sufficient, in my opinion. Why I think standardization is important and can help, it's because a lot of developers of AI systems are startups. They don't have the time, the means, the energy, the personnel to really study all what we want them to respect. So if we do this for them in a way, and this is the standard, it will be a tool that they can use. And therefore, it's, in my opinion, something that can enable them to come up with their system and saying, well, I did the necessary to put this standard inside. And again, those standards are not just technical, they are also standards that have been built based on ethical requirements. And the IEEE is an international organization. There are a lot of technical standards issued by the IEEE. One of them, we are using it right now, it's the Wi-Fi. The 802. etc. is this IEEE standard. So this is what enables us to connect our computers to the Wi-Fi. But ISO is also working on similar things. There has been very recently a standard issued in Great Britain, in the UK, about transparency. So I think I'm optimistic, I mean, about the possibility to implement such standards if people actually want to do it. And I would even go further, because this is where legislation can come into place. If the legislator says, in order to have this certification, you must abide by such or such standard, that is a standard that is trustworthy, that because it has been developed by a trustworthy organization, it has been evaluated, etc., then people will have to do it. And you have such standards already, for example. And now about access to justice, I mean, I want to say something about the whole issue of using digital technologies. And this is an example of real life. I take the bus. To not buy your ticket on the bus. You have to buy your ticket before boarding the bus, and or you have a card, special card. But if you board the bus without a ticket, you can still buy the ticket on the bus using a mobile phone, a smartphone, and sending an SMS on the smartphone. A lot of people don't have this device. And basically, those are, in general, of course, minorities or etc. So these people, either they don't take the bus or they still board the bus and are not compliant with the law. So they, which means it's excluding people from social life. Digital technologies are, in principle, designed to be more inclusive, to make services more accessible, etc. And they are an instrument of exclusion. This is a real problem. It's not related just to AI. It's related to digital technologies in general, and several of them have some AI inside. And I think it's our duty to reflect on this issue and to come up with some recommendations, because situations like that will lead to more and more exclusion and more social unrest, I would say. Give the example of medical professions. In medical professions, and you have the Ordre des Médecins, who is the institution that puts forward these code of conducts and verify that the professionals abide with the code of conducts. But at the same time, there's a law. There's a law that is a framework within which this whole operation has been defined. the Ordre des Médecins has a legal role as well. And we don't have such a thing in computer science or in engineering in general. So I see codes of conduct as an interesting and good way, provided they are defined as one of the instruments that is under a legal framework, not just like that. I mean, open to anyone to define their own codes, etc. Yeah, so I tried to answer some of your issues, but I'll leave it to Karine now.
Yes, may I speak after you? We cannot create professional orders for it's only special professional because there is a constitutional question. So, but the project of artificial intelligence regulation of the European obliges to create an independent regulatory authority. And now there is a group, I'm in the group with the State Council about public administration and artificial intelligence. But anyway, we must stress the fact that soft law may be controlled by the judge. Public soft law is may be controlled by the State Council in the recours pour excès de pouvoir, the ultra vires plea, and they can be also invoked in judicial before the judiciary judge, because soft law is an instrument of law which is supposed to influence behavior. So it's not quite normative, but it's a frame. And in fact, there is the problem too of responsibility because of soft law. And it's a true question that you have raised. And it's very important to the role of the lawyers in this problem is in fact to try to translate all the things you have very interestingly explained and to find legal tools. So there is a change in the normativity, and you know, the challenge is to find something which is not too hard or not too tough, and then something which must be which must respect the principle of adaptability, because as you know this better than me, artificial intelligence, you say something 1 year and the year later it's obliterate. So it's a problem. So the fact is that we mustn't forget that at stake is that there will be a control of the judiciary on all these things. So we have to have a legal framework, and the problem is that the private soft law is even more complicated, because the private soft law is produced by indeed private corporations, private bodies, and it may have an impact of, as the Council of States, of general interest. So that's the challenge, and it's very important for the concretization of human rights, but not only human rights, but the true trustworthiness of artificial intelligence, as you said. It's in fact so. There is a change in law, but sooner or later, a judge will control that. A judge will control that. It's not a solution, but it's something we must keep in mind. And all the problem is to create soft law or a control of soft law. And there is the problem, of course, of compliance and the ethics, the soft ethics about compliance. Because compliance is not always the answer, but of course you have to have a degree of freedom for the private bodies, but indeed there will be a problem of compliance. But I stress on the fact that there will be public administrative body in the European Union anyway that will be in charge of a kind of overall scope of the situation. It could be, for instance, it's not.
Yes, Antoine, excuse me.
Thank you. Sorry.
It's time to give the floor to Karine Gentelet. Gentelet.
Sorry, because I was cut off. I didn't see that.
No,
sorry.
no problem, no problem. This is a discussion, so
sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
no problem. This is very interesting, and you will really notice that I'm not a legal expert. I'm a sociologist and anthropologist, indeed of law, but I don't see all the differences and the technicality. I understand the technicality between soft law and hard law, etc. But you know, for me, and this is why I wanted to talk about human rights, because I was thinking about, you know, a notion that address what I see on the field, on the ground, from the people I talk to about, okay, if I have been, you know, if one of my rights have been violated, to whom what should I do? What should I do? And when you read, for example, the AI Act, which is very interesting, there is nothing for people, for average citizen to have like to demand for their rights. So this is a problem that I still don't have any answer. So I understand the technicality because soft law and hard law, but also, you know, the why do we need at like an interstate or, you know, international level, such as the European Commission, why do we need to talk about code of conduct? I understand that, and it's but it's not maybe the place to do that. It's with AI developer, and I understand that we need to educate, to train AI developer with social science training to understand the consequences of labeling, for example, Black people as gorilla. This is, but there is so many impact on people that I don't understand why and I'm very honest with you. I've been doing that study for most 1 year, and I still don't understand why do we need to focus on technology. This is not an issue of technology. This is an issue of impact that have on people's life. And I'm not against AI, or I don't need to be against or pro with AI. This is not the question, but I don't understand why it is based on technology and why there is such a focus on developers. We need, and this is why I was talking about human rights as an ecosystem of protecting society, but also people, because we know that, and we know because of mostly civil society organization, that there is a lot of harm on fundamental rights. This is why I think we need to tackle that. So I don't know if I answered to your question, Thierry, about, you know, the technical change, because when you focus on technology and it's like, how can I phrase that? But it's like when you talk about human rights and when you look at human rights with, you know, AI or technology lens, it's like, how are we going to address if there is, because I was thinking about, for example, Pegasus. It was supposed to be designed for, you know, control, you know, the mafia and illegal activities, and it has been used to control, you know, human rights defender, for example. So there is a lot of mass surveillance tools that are misused. So what are we going to do with that if we focus on technology, how it's developed? How are we going to address the abuse following misuses, first of all? Yeah. And we know that, you know, every legal framework, it's complicated to change what have been developed. It takes a long time. So most of the legal framework that have been developed, you know, they are already, especially because the technology changing very quickly. So most of the framework are going to be, you know, outdated in few months. So this is for me an issue.
But indeed, it's the interest of soft law is that you have hard law, which is completed, but soft law, which can be adapted. But of course, I don't say that there is a problem of efficiency of protection of fundamental rights towards, for instance, artificial intelligence, but it doesn't prevent us from trying to find legal or administrative remedies, which could be, of course, insufficient because it's a political problem. It's a problem of legitimacy. It's a problem of course, of representation of citizens, a new way of representing in the frame of the democracy. But it is very stressed in many public law literature and also private law that soft law should be a kind of completion of a hard frame legal system, because of course, so some principle which may be indeed being made efficient, and soft law. The problem of soft law is, of course, the legitimacy, where it comes from, etc. But I don't say that the legal remedies are sufficient or would be ever only sufficient. I do agree with you. There is a problem of shaping new ways of protecting and voilà.
May I? Yeah, Thierry? Can I? Okay.
Sorry. Sorry. Of course. You.
Maybe Raja, you want to add something? I just want to react to what you said. This is, yeah, indeed, legal instruments are not sufficient, but probably they send also, they have to send the right messages to people that they are going to be heard. And this is why sometimes to have principle, this is nice. But when you, for example, in Canada, we have a human rights impact assessment for algorithm tool. You check the boxes, but you check any boxes you want. And at the end, you know, if your tool is going to be misused or have the effect that you were not supposed to have, what are the solution for the people who are impacted? And I was talking two weeks ago, I was attending to a workshop, and one of the organizers, Sophia, was glad to see her because she was there too. And one of the the panelists was saying that he developed a tool for a company. It was, I don't remember exactly what the tool was for, but the company used the tool for another purpose. So what, you know, he could have checked all the checks saying, yeah, it's there is no impact on human rights and have like a green pass to develop his tool. But if the tool is going to be used by someone else and have other impact, what is the consequences of the people on which the tool is going to be used? So this is also a problem, and we have no answer right now. So this is why I was saying I understand, and technically it would be a question of hard law, soft law, but we need to give concrete protection to people to make sure that when they see that some of their rights have been abused, they have some means to ask for justice. And this is not what we have right now. And I understand this is quite new in societies, and the deployment is probably just at the beginning. When we look at history, the history scale, it's quite new, but I think we have to think about that.
Yeah.
May I say something?
A question of Olivia in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah, just one point about misuse. I mean, I don't see this as a new problem. There are various technologies, very basic ones actually, that can be misused, and usually what happens is that this goes to the legal system, to the judge, to provide I mean, to assess the situation, etc. The point is, who is responsible in this case? Is it the designer of the system, or is it the party that has misused it? Should the designer have put some measures that prevent this misuse? But the problem is that it's very difficult to predict what kind of misuse people are going to make. So, but it appears to me it's not really new. What's specific about AI here, that it's very pervasive, but you can use any technology in a bad way. And I don't think something specifically related to AI, unless I'm mistaken, of course, is to say about this.
I agree with you, Raja. And this is why I don't understand why do we need to develop with so much energy, you know, act based on AI? Because we have all the structure, and as I was saying, it's not perfect, but we already have the structure. And to answer a question from Olivia about the improvement regarding participation of users, when we look at the health sector, for example, we have a comité paritaire with representation from the users, and I was looking, a colleague of mine, I don't know her in fact, but it's Timney Jibrou. She just launched a paper saying that maybe can have like a citizen auditing of the algorithm, for example. And also we have like MPs could look at the, I don't know, there is a lot of structure that we already use that we can apply to AI. And as you said, we don't have like a automobile act, for example. So I understand that in AI, there is a lot of, it's a larger scale of impact on society. I understand that, but honestly, as a sociologist, I'm thinking after so many months working on that, I still don't understand why we have such a sacralisation, as we say in French, of AI, and we keep it as it's not, it's floating in the air like clouds, and I don't understand that. And I'm pretty sure as society, we are very creative, we are very dynamic, and I'm pretty sure we can find some governance model, some committee, I don't know, name it. We are used to work at the international level, national level, local, regional, especially in France. When you look at the different state level that we have, I'm pretty sure we can find something to work with.
Well, I have an answer to this, actually, excuse me. The reason why there is an act is that how do I say, designers and deployers of AI system to date try to escape their responsibility by saying it's AI. So it's AI, it's new, we don't control, it's a black box, we don't know why it did this. We didn't expect that, it's not, sorry, I mean, this, all the bias, etc. That's the point. The point that the discourse is like if AI is something new that arrived from outer space, an alien thing that has to be treated differently, and that enables to escape responsibility of the designers and deployers. This is the point that led to have all these ethical declarations, all these discussions, and also the legislative instrument. Because of this attitude towards AI, which is like the mysterious black box, I'm not responsible, it's not me.
But there is two scales of reflection. The political choice about the use of artificial intelligence. For instance, we could say, why should we prohibit, forbid use of intelligence artificial in public service, for instance? But it's not what's going on. And the fact is that we have to have a frame. And let me tell you that often soft law become hard case law. First. Secondly, we have a reflection about responsibilities without fault or with fault, and there is, because of compliance, all you have explained, there will be frame. Of course, there is education, and so many education is important, and it's stressed in many reports. But the fact is that we have to domesticate this artificial intelligence. And that's why we use some legal paths, but it can be political decision, as there is in the project of artificial intelligence, the prohibition of use of artificial intelligence, which are in Europe and which are not in the United States. It is not possible in the French constitutional law and in the European law to use compass or something like that in penal criminal trials, and it's very important. So there is a problem of limits, of course, of efficiency, but as you say, Mr. CHATILA, I do agree. We'll have to create tools which indeed will have a kind of efficiency on responsibility, of knowledge, of ethics, but of course there is a political choice anyway. So Alexis, you may. Alexis, you have the floor.
Yes, I just wanted.
Yes.
I just wanted to add an issue. Karine was asking what it is special with artificial intelligence. I don't think there is something really special with AI. No, there is something. Let's say there is something special with a more broad topic, which is using autonomous artifacts in decision or recommendation tasks. Okay, now this may have some special features, essentially for two reasons. One is because it is too widespread today. But the second, which is much more important, it is the market asymmetry between who provides the services and who uses the services. Now, this market asymmetry, as a consequence, has that we shape the market of services and how people access and use them in ways that even the ones that design them cannot anticipate. That has to do with even with funny examples, but also with more serious ones. No? And so there's nothing special with the idea of using AI. The idea is that we want to modify how a bunch of decision processes are run. And many among the ones that want to decide that do not know what that will result to. And that could be a matter of concern. But it's not AI as such. AI is a very specific subject, and it's even more specific when we talk the AI in terms of machine learning and things like this. But there might be a much broader concern.
Thank you. So indeed, we need further discussions and studies, and it's been very interesting, but I think that now it's time to have a little small break. Thank you very much before the second session. Thank you very much for all your interventions. Sorry if I couldn't be at the beginning, but I had the problem perhaps of artificial or human intelligence, I don't know, to join you at the beginning. Thank you very much, and we'll sure have more discussions and solutions to find. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a short break before starting the next session.
We need that.
Thanks to all of us. Thanks to the contributors and the discussion.